Hey there, friends! Before we jump into this super exciting story, I want you to do something fun. Drop a comment below and tell me, where are you watching from today? Are you at home, at school, or maybe somewhere cool like a park? And if you love stories with big surprises, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It's like joining a club for awesome tales. Okay, ready? Here we go. Have you ever had a neighbor who acted like they were the boss of everyone? Like they made all the rules and told everybody what to do? Well, this story is about a lady named Sarah Thompson. She was a regular mom living in a quiet little neighborhood with neat houses and green lawns. To all the people around her, Sarah seemed super normal. She went to yoga classes, shopped for groceries, and waved hello to everyone. Nobody thought she was anything special, but guess what? Sarah had a secret, a big one. And that secret was about to shake things up for her nosy neighbor in a way nobody expected. So, what's the wildest thing a neighbor ever did to you? Think about it and stick with me, because this story has a twist that'll make your jaw drop. It all started on a bright, sunny Saturday morning. The birds were chirping and the air smelled like fresh grass. Sarah was in her cozy kitchen making breakfast for her kids. Her smart speaker was playing happy music and she hummed along, stirring pancake batter. The sun streamed through the window and everything felt perfect. Sarah loved days like this, calm and peaceful. She flipped a pancake and smiled, thinking about how lucky she was to live in such a nice place. But then bam, a loud knock shook her front door. It was so loud it made her jump, and a little batter splattered on the counter. Sarah wiped her hands on a towel and walked to the door, wondering who could be knocking so hard. When she opened it, there stood Linda, the president of the Homeowners Association, or HOA for short. The HOA was a group that made rules for the neighborhood, like how tall your grass could be or what color your house could be painted. Linda was in charge, and she loved being in charge. She had a frown on her face, and her eyes were sharp, like they could cut through anything. Her arms were crossed, and she looked ready to yell. Sarah blinked, surprised. "Good morning, Linda," she said politely, trying to keep things friendly. But Linda wasn't in a friendly mood. "Turn that noise down," she snapped, pointing a finger at Sarah's smart speaker, which was still playing music in the kitchen. "This is a respectable neighborhood and we don't need your loud songs ruining it." Her voice was so sharp it felt like a poke. Sarah tilted her head, listening to the music. It wasn't even that loud, just a soft tune you could barely hear outside, but Linda acted like it was a rock concert. Sarah wanted to laugh, but she kept her face calm. "Oh, I'm sorry, Linda," she said sweetly. "I didn't know it was bothering anyone. I'll turn it down." Inside, though, Sarah was rolling her eyes so hard she thought they might get stuck. Linda was always like this, finding something to complain about. If it wasn't music, it was something else. One time, Linda left a note on Sarah's mailbox because it was too shiny. Another time, she said Sarah's flowers were too colorful and made the street look messy. Can you believe that? Complaining about flowers. Sarah thought it was silly, but she didn't argue. She just smiled and nodded like she always did. But here's the thing Linda didn't know. Sarah wasn't just a mom who made pancakes and grew pretty flowers. She was someone special, someone nobody in that neighborhood expected. Sarah had moved to this neighborhood a few months ago. She came with her 2 kids, a friendly dog, and a big moving truck. Everyone thought she was just another new person trying to fit in. She joined the yoga class at the community center where ladies stretched and chatted about recipes. She shopped at the local grocery store, picking out apples and cereal like anyone else. She even went to the neighborhood picnic, bringing her famous chocolate chip cookies that everyone loved. "Oh, Sarah's so nice," people said. "Just a regular mom raising her kids." But they were wrong. Sarah had a side to her that nobody saw, not her neighbors, not the yoga ladies, and definitely not Linda. On that Saturday morning, as Linda stood there scolding her about the music, Sarah kept her cool. She turned down the speaker even though it was already quiet. "Is that better?" she asked, her voice soft and polite. Linda huffed like she was annoyed that Sarah wasn't arguing. "It better stay that way," she said, then turned and marched back to her house across the street. Sarah watched her go, closing the door gently. She leaned against it and let out a little laugh. "Oh, Linda," she whispered to herself. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Let's talk about Linda for a second. Linda wasn't just bossy, she was the queen of bossy. She walked around the neighborhood like she owned every house, every tree, every blade of grass. If someone parked their car an inch too close to her driveway, she'd write a long letter about it. If a kid left a toy on the sidewalk, Linda would knock on their door and lecture their parents. She had a little notebook where she wrote down everything she thought was wrong in the neighborhood. Sarah had seen that notebook once when Linda dropped it at a meeting. It was full of complaints like Mr. Johnson's dog barks at 7 a.m. or the Smith's trash can was out too early. Everybody knew Linda was strict, but nobody said anything. Why? Because Linda could make life hard. If you broke an HOA rule, she'd send you a fine, a bill you had to pay for things like leaving your garage door open too long. Some people even said Linda enjoyed making people nervous. She'd walk by your house, squinting at your lawn, and you'd wonder what rule you broke this time. Sarah had heard all about Linda before she even moved in. The real estate lady warned her, saying, "Watch out for Linda. She's intense," but Sarah just smiled and said, "I can handle intense." Back in her kitchen, Sarah went back to her pancakes. Her kids, Emma and Jake, came running in, their sneakers squeaking on the floor. "Mom, who is at the door?" Emma asked, grabbing a juice box from the fridge. Just Linda, Sarah said, flipping a pancake. She didn't like our music. Jake giggled. She's always mad about something, he said, and Sarah nodded. Yup, but don't worry about her. We've got pancakes to eat. The kids cheered and Sarah set the table, pouring syrup and passing out plates. It looked like a normal morning with a normal family in a normal house, but Sarah's mind was already working. See, Sarah wasn't just good at making pancakes or being a mom. She had a job, a secret job that nobody in the neighborhood knew about. She wasn't a spy or a superhero, but she was super smart when it came to figuring things out. Sarah loved puzzles, not the kind with pieces you put together, but the kind where you find clues and solve mysteries. Ever since she was a kid, she'd been good at noticing things other people missed. Like how her teacher hid candy in her desk or how her brother tried to sneak cookies before dinner. Now, as a grown-up, Sarah used that skill for something bigger. When Sarah moved to this neighborhood, she wasn't just looking for a nice place to raise her kids. She had a reason, a mission, and Linda, with her loud knocks and mean glares, was about to walk right into the middle of it. Sarah didn't let on, though. She kept her secret close like a treasure she wasn't ready to share. Every time Linda complained, Sarah just smiled and went back to her day. But she was watching, listening, waiting. And that Saturday morning, when Linda banged on her door about the music, Sarah knew something was coming, something big. The neighborhood was quiet as Sarah cleaned up the breakfast dishes. Outside, kids rode bikes and a dog barked somewhere down the street. It looked like any other day, with flowers blooming and mailboxes lined up in neat rows. But Sarah could feel it. A storm was brewing. Not the kind with rain and thunder, but the kind where secrets come out and everything changes. She dried her hands and looked out the window, seeing Linda's house across the street. Linda was on her porch, writing in that notebook again. Sarah's lips curved into a tiny smile. Keep writing, Linda, she thought. You're making this easier than I expected. What was Sarah's secret? Why was she so calm when Linda was so mean? And what did she know that nobody else did? Those questions hung in the air like a song you can't stop humming. Sarah wasn't worried about Linda's complaints. She wasn't scared of her glares or her rules, because Sarah had a plan and Linda was about to find out what happens when you pick on the wrong neighbor. Want to know what happens next? Stay with me because this story is just getting started and the surprises are bigger than you think. Linda wasn't just bossy, she was like a storm that never stopped. Every single day, she found something new to grumble about in the neighborhood. It was like she had a list of things to complain about, and Sarah's house was at the top. One morning, Linda marched over and said Sarah's flowers were too bright. Can you imagine that? Flowers. She said they made the street look messy, like colorful petals were a crime. Sarah just nodded and said, okay, I'll think about it. But inside, she thought it was silly. Who gets mad about flowers? Another time, Linda complained that Sarah's car was parked too close to the curb. It was maybe an inch off, but Linda acted like it was blocking the whole road. She stood there with her hands on her hips, tapping her foot, and said, this isn't how we do things here. Sarah smiled and moved her car, even though she didn't need to. She didn't want to start a fight, not yet, but the craziest thing. One day, Sarah left her bike leaning against her own garage just for a minute while she grabbed a water bottle. When she came back, a tow truck was there. Linda had called it, saying the bike was cluttering the neighborhood. Sarah had to wave the driver away and promise it wouldn't happen again. A bike in her own driveway. All the neighbors knew about Linda's power trips. They'd whisper about her when she wasn't around. Did you hear what Linda did to Mr. Carter's mailbox? They'd say. Or she fined the Wilsons for leaving a soccer ball in their yard. Everyone was a little scared of her. Linda was the president of the Homeowners Association, or HOA, which meant she made rules for everyone. If you broke one, she'd send you a letter or even a fine, a bill you had to pay. Nobody wanted to make her mad, so they stayed quiet. If Linda said your grass was too long, you mowed it. If she didn't like your Halloween decorations, you took them down. It was easier that way. But Sarah was different. She didn't get mad or yell when Linda came knocking. She'd just listen, nod, and say something polite like, thanks for letting me know. Then she'd go back to her day like nothing happened. The neighbors noticed. Sarah's so patient, they'd say. I'd lose it if Linda kept bugging me like that. What they didn't see was the look in Sarah's eyes. Behind her soft smile, she was watching everything. Every time Linda complained, Sarah paid attention. Every time Linda wrote something in her little notebook, Sarah remembered. She was listening, learning, and keeping track of every single thing Linda did. Linda thought she was the queen of the neighborhood. She walked around with her chin up like she owned every house and every street. She'd stop by people's yards, squinting at their fences or mailboxes, looking for something to fix. Once she told a kid he couldn't ride his skateboard because it was too noisy. A skateboard, the kid's mom apologized, even though she didn't want to. That's how it was with Linda. People did what she said because they didn't want trouble. But Sarah wasn't like that. She wasn't afraid of Linda, even if Linda didn't know it yet. Linda didn't know was that Sarah was just keeping track for fun. She wasn't writing things down because she was bored. Sarah had a special job, a secret one that made her way smarter than the average mom. While other people were busy with soccer practice or grocery shopping, Sarah was doing something else. She was good at finding things out, like a detective in a mystery book. Ever play a game where you look for clues? That's what Sarah did, but for real. And right now, her clues were all about Linda. Linda thought her life was perfect. She had a big house with fancy curtains and a shiny car in the driveway. She always wore nice clothes and her hair was never messy. At HOA meetings, she'd talk about how the neighborhood needed to be perfect too and everyone should follow her rules. But Sarah saw things differently. She noticed little details that nobody else did, like how Linda's car was brand new, even though she said she didn't have extra money. Or how she got fancy packages delivered all the time like she was shopping for a palace. Sarah didn't say anything, but she was curious. Why did Linda have so much stuff? Where was it all coming from? Sarah's secret job made her really good at asking questions like that. She wasn't just a mom who baked cookies or went to yoga class. She was putting together a puzzle, and every piece was about Linda's so-called perfect life. It was like building a picture out of tiny bits, each complaint, each note, each time Linda acted like she was better than everyone else. Sarah kept it all in her head like a map she was drawing, and every day that map got clearer. Have you ever had someone think you weren't important? Maybe they acted like you didn't know anything or couldn't do something cool. That's what Linda thought about Sarah. She saw Sarah as just another neighbor to boss around, someone who'd follow her rules and stay quiet. But Linda was so wrong. Sarah wasn't just patient or polite. She was smart, she was strong, and she was ready to show everyone what happens when you pick on the wrong person. One afternoon, Linda came by again. This time it was about Sarah's porch light. "It's too bright," Linda said, pointing at the little bulb by Sarah's door. "It's keeping people awake at night." Sarah looked at the light. It was so small it barely lit up the porch, let alone the street. She wanted to laugh, but she didn't. "I'll fix it," she said, her voice calm. Linda nodded like she'd won a big battle and walked away. Sarah watched her go, her smile fading just a little. She wasn't mad, not really. But she was thinking, planning. That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table after her kids were asleep. The house was quiet, except for the hum of her smart speaker playing soft music. She opened her laptop and started typing. She wasn't writing a grocery list or a note to her kid's teacher. She was looking at things about Linda, things nobody else knew. Emails, numbers, little bits of information she'd found. It was like collecting puzzle pieces, and Sarah was getting close to seeing the whole picture. Linda kept pushing, thinking she was in charge. She kept complaining, thinking Sarah would just listen. But Sarah wasn't just listening. She was building something big. And soon Linda would find out that Sarah wasn't the quiet, ordinary mom she thought. The neighborhood was about to see a side of Sarah that would change everything. Can you imagine what it's like to surprise someone who thinks they know you? Sarah was ready to do just that. Weeks passed, and Linda's complaints got wilder and wilder. It was like she couldn't stop finding things to fuss about at Sarah's house. One day she said Sarah's mailbox was too red. Another time she grumbled that Sarah's dog barked once in the morning. Once she even knocked on Sarah's door because a butterfly landed on her flowers and Linda said it was attracting bugs. Can you believe that? A butterfly? Sarah always stayed calm though. She'd smile, nod, and say, "I'll take care of it, Linda." But deep down, she was watching every move Linda made, like a cat watching a mouse. One evening, things got really crazy. The sun was setting and the sky was all pink and orange. Sarah was in her living room folding laundry while her smart speaker played soft music. Her kids were upstairs doing homework and the house felt cozy. Suddenly there was a loud bang at the door. Sarah looked up, surprised. She walked over and opened it, and there was Linda looking madder than ever. Her face was red and her arms were crossed tight. "Your speaker is disturbing the peace," Linda shouted, pointing at the little device on Sarah's shelf. The music was so quiet you could barely hear it, but Linda acted like it was a huge party. Sarah tilted her head and smiled. "Would you like some iced tea, Linda? Come in, let's talk," she said, trying to be nice, but Linda wasn't having it. She shook her head and pulled out her phone. "I'm done asking," she huffed. "I'm calling the cops if you don't turn that thing off right now." Sarah just shrugged, calm as ever. "Go ahead, Linda," she said. "I've got nothing to hide." Her voice was soft, but there was a tiny spark in her eyes, like she knew something Linda didn't. Linda's eyes got wide, like she couldn't believe Sarah wasn't scared. She tapped her phone and started talking to the police. "Hello, yes, I'm reporting illegal noise," she said, her voice loud and angry. "There's suspicious activity at my neighbor's house and it's ruining the neighborhood." She went on and on, waving her free hand like she was giving a big speech. Sarah stood there, leaning against the doorframe, watching quietly. She didn't look worried at all. In fact, she looked a little amused, like she was waiting for something. Then something super weird happened. Right in the middle of Linda's yelling, Sarah's smart speaker made a noise. Ding, it wasn't music this time, it was a voice. "Reminder, check the HOA records tonight," the speaker said, clear as day. Linda stopped talking, her mouth hung open and her face went pale like she'd seen a ghost. She stared at the speaker, then at Sarah, then back at the speaker. What was that?" she stammered, her voice shaky. "Why would a speaker talk about HOA records?" "Those were the papers Linda kept for the neighborhood rules and money." It was strange, and Linda looked nervous. Sarah didn't say a word. She just raised an eyebrow and her eyes twinkled with mischief, like she was holding back a laugh. She turned off the speaker and shrugged again. "Oh, just a reminder for me," she said casually. "Nothing to worry about." But Linda wasn't buying it. She looked scared, like that reminder meant something big. She mumbled something about watching you and hurried back to her house, almost tripping on the sidewalk. Sarah closed the door and let out a little chuckle. Things were getting interesting. Here's the thing, Sarah wasn't just good at making cookies or helping her kids with math. She was a tech whiz, like someone who knows all about computers and gadgets. She could make her smart speaker do all kinds of tricks, like set timers or play songs. But she could also use it to find information, like a super smart librarian. Sarah had been digging into the neighborhood's secrets for weeks, not because she was nosy, but because she had a reason, a big one. She moved to this neighborhood on purpose, and it wasn't just to raise her kids in a nice place. Linda thought she was the boss of everything, but she was hiding something. Sarah knew it. Every time Linda complained, Sarah got another clue. It was like playing a game of hide-and-seek, and Sarah was really good at finding things. She noticed how Linda always had new stuff like fancy clothes or a shiny new grill on her patio. Once Sarah saw a big delivery truck drop off a huge box at Linda's house. It looked expensive, like something you'd see in a mansion. Sarah didn't say anything, but she wondered, how could Linda afford all that? At night when her kids were asleep, Sarah would sit at her kitchen table with her laptop. She wasn't watching funny videos or shopping for shoes. She was looking at boring stuff like emails and numbers from the HOA. Most people would fall asleep reading that, but not Sarah. To her, it was like a treasure map. She found little hints that something wasn't right, like how the HOA money cash that everyone paid for things like fixing the park wasn't adding up. There was less than there should be. Where was it going? Sarah had a guess, and it pointed right at Linda. Speaker thing was an accident. Sarah had set it up to say that reminder knowing Linda was there. She wanted to see how Linda would react, and boy, did she get an answer. Linda's scared face told Sarah she was on the right track. It was like finding a big piece of the puzzle. Sarah didn't tell anyone what she was doing, not her kids, not her neighbors, nobody. She kept her secret close like a favorite toy you don't share. But every day, she got closer to figuring out what Linda was hiding. The neighbors started noticing things too. One day, Mrs. Carter, who lived next door, whispered to Sarah at the mailbox. Linda's been acting weird, she said. She keeps checking her phone like she's nervous. Sarah just nodded, but inside she was smiling. Another clue. Then at the park, Mr. Wilson told Sarah he got a strange HOA bill for extra fees. He didn't know why, and Linda wouldn't explain. Sarah listened and said, "That's odd, I'll look into it." She didn't tell him she was already looking, really looking. Linda kept pushing Sarah, thinking she could scare her. She'd walk by Sarah's house, staring at the windows like she was searching for trouble. Once she left a note saying Sarah's trash can was out too early. It was one day early. Sarah laughed and tossed the note away. She wasn't worried about Linda's silly rules anymore. She was too busy putting her plan together. Every complaint, every note, every glare from Linda made Sarah surer. Something big was coming, and Linda had no idea. Sarah's normal life was just a cover, like a costume she wore. She went to yoga, baked cookies, and helped at school, but that was only part of her. The other part was sneaky and smart, like a detective in a story. She moved here for a reason, and Linda's meddling was making it easier for Sarah to do her job. Can you guess what Sarah found? It's a secret that's about to change everything. Stick around, this story's getting really good. Next morning started like any other in the quiet neighborhood. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and kids were getting ready for school. But then something big happened. 2 police cars rolled down the street, their lights flashing red and blue. Everyone stopped what they were doing. Neighbors peeked out their windows, and some stepped onto their porches to see what was going on. Linda was on her porch too, standing with her arms crossed and a big smirk on her face. She looked like she just won a prize. See, Linda had called 911 again the night before. She told the police some silly story about Sarah's smart speaker hacking her Wi-Fi. She said it was causing trouble and needed to be stopped. Linda thought this was her chance to finally get Sarah in trouble. She'd been complaining about Sarah for weeks, about her flowers, her music, even her mailbox. Now she was sure the police would take her side and make Sarah look bad. She stood there, watching the police cars, thinking she was the smartest person in the neighborhood. But then something surprising happened. The police didn't park in front of Sarah's house. They didn't walk up her driveway or knock on her door. Instead, they pulled right up to Linda's house. The whole street went quiet. You could hear a dog bark in the distance, but nobody said a word. 2 officers got out of the cars, their boots clicking on the pavement. One of them was holding a thick stack of papers, and he looked serious. They walked up Linda's steps, right past her fancy flower pots and shiny new mailbox. Linda's smirk disappeared. Her eyes got wide, like she wasn't sure what was happening. "Ma'am," the officer said, looking right at Linda. "We need to talk about the HOA funds." He held up the stack of papers, and his voice was calm but firm. Linda's jaw dropped, like someone had pulled the ground out from under her. Her hands started to shake, and she grabbed the railing to steady herself. "What? No, this is a mistake," she stammered, her voice all wobbly. "I didn't do anything wrong." But the officer just shook his head like he'd heard that before. He handed her the papers, and Linda stared at them like they were written in a language she didn't understand. That's when Sarah stepped outside her house across the street. She was wearing her usual jeans and a simple t-shirt, looking as calm as ever. She didn't run or shout, she just walked to the edge of her lawn and stood there, hands in her pockets. The neighbors turned to look at her, wondering why she was so relaxed. Linda saw her too, and her face got even paler. Sarah smiled just a little, and then she spoke, loud enough for everyone to hear. "No mistake, Linda," she said. "I've been tracking your accounts for months. You've been stealing from the HOA, thousands of dollars. You used it for your vacations, your new car, even that fancy deck in your backyard." The crowd gasped. It was like someone had turned on a light in a dark room. Neighbors whispered to each other, their eyes wide. "Stealing," they said, "from the HOA." Nobody could believe it. Linda was the one who made all the rules, who told everyone how to act. She was supposed to be perfect, but Sarah wasn't done. She pulled out her phone and held it up like it was a magic wand. I've got proof, she said, emails, bank records, pictures of all the stuff you bought with the money you took. She tapped her screen and a picture showed up, a photo of Linda's new car parked in her driveway. Then another picture of the big wooden deck behind her house with shiny new furniture. The neighbors leaned closer, trying to see. Sarah swiped her phone again, showing an email from the HOA bank account. It said money was sent to a company for landscaping, but there was no landscaping in the neighborhood. Another email showed a payment for a community event, but nobody remembered any events. The crowd started murmuring louder now, and some people looked mad. Linda's face turned red, then white, then red again. That's not true. She shouted, but her voice sounded weak, like she didn't believe it herself. She looked around, hoping someone would help her, but nobody did. Sarah kept going, her voice steady and clear. You thought nobody would notice, Linda, she said. But I did. I've been watching every penny you spent. That trip to the beach last summer, paid for with HOA money. Those new curtains in your living room, HOA money. Even the fancy grill you showed off at your barbecue, yup, HOA money. The neighbors were buzzing now, shaking their heads. Mr. Carter, who lived next door, called out, we paid for that grill. Mrs. Wilson nodded, her arms crossed. And I paid extra HOA fees last month, she said. Where did that go? Linda tried to talk, but her words got all jumbled. I can explain, she said, waving her hands. It's not what you think, but the officer stepped closer, holding up a hand to quiet her. Ma'am, we'll talk at the station, he said. You need to come with us. Linda looked like she might cry. Her fancy shoes didn't seem so fancy anymore as she stood there, clutching those papers. The neighbors kept staring, and some even pulled out their phones to take pictures. This was big news, and nobody wanted to miss it. That's when the truth came out, the real surprise. Sarah wasn't just a regular mom who liked yoga and baking cookies. She was a freelance investigator, which means she was hired to find out when people were doing bad things like stealing. The city had asked her to move to this neighborhood and keep an eye on the HOA because they thought something fishy was going on. And guess what? Linda was the fishiest of all. Sarah had been working on this for months, collecting clues like a detective in a mystery book. All those times Linda complained about Sarah's flowers or music, Sarah was using them to get closer to the truth. Linda was my biggest case, Sarah said, looking at the crowd. She thought I was just a quiet neighbor, but I was here to find out what she was hiding. The neighbors gasped again, louder this time. You're a detective? Little Emma from down the street asked, her eyes huge. Sarah laughed softly. Sort of, she said. I just like solving puzzles. But it was more than that. Sarah had spent hours on her laptop, reading boring bank papers and checking emails. She'd even used her smart speaker to help, setting it up to find information when nobody was looking. That reminder about HOA records, it was no accident. Sarah knew it would make Linda nervous, and it did. Linda stood frozen on her porch, the papers shaking in her hands. The officers waited, one of them talking into a radio. The whole street was watching, and Sarah stood tall like she'd just finished a big job. She didn't yell or brag, she didn't need to. The truth was out, and it was bigger than anyone expected. Linda had been caught, and Sarah was the one who made it happen. Can you imagine how shocked everyone was? They thought Sarah was just like them, but she was a hero in disguise. Linda's days of being the bossy queen were done. The police walked her off her porch, one officer on each side, and put her in the back of their car. The neighbors watched, and then they started clapping. Some even cheered like they were at a game. They were so happy. For months, Linda had made everyone follow her silly rules, like keeping lawns too short or taking down fun decorations. Now she was the one in trouble, and it felt fair. That night, the neighborhood had a big meeting. It was called an emergency meeting because it was super important. Everyone gathered in the community center, sitting on chairs in a big circle. They talked about what happened with Linda and the HOA, which was the group that made rules for the houses. People were still shocked that Linda took money that didn't belong to her. They wanted to make things right, so they decided to pick a new HOA president. Guess who they chose? Sarah. Sarah was surprised when they said her name. Me? She asked, pointing to herself. She didn't really want to be in charge. She liked her quiet life with her kids and her dog, but the neighbors begged her. You're fair, said Mr. Carter. You caught Linda, said Mrs. Wilson. Sarah thought about it and finally nodded. Okay, she said, but I'm not making any silly rules. Everyone clapped again, excited for a change. Sarah promised one big thing, no more mean rules or bossy power trips. She said the neighborhood should be a fun place, not a place where people felt scared to break tiny rules. And you know what? It worked. The very next day, things felt different. Kids rode their bikes down the street, laughing and racing even after the old curfew time. Nobody yelled at them. People planted flowers in every color, red, yellow, purple, pink, and nobody got a note saying they were too bright. The neighborhood felt lighter, like everyone could breathe easier. Sarah went back to her normal life. She made pancakes for her kids, walked her dog, and played music on her smart speaker. Sometimes she turned it up just a little loud, smiling to herself. If anyone thought about complaining, they didn't dare. Sarah wasn't mean, but everyone knew she was smart and strong. They didn't want to mess with her. People who used to ignore Sarah started coming by her house. They brought gifts like homemade pies or cookies and said, "Thank you, Sarah." They were sorry for not noticing how special she was before. Sarah just smiled and took the treats. No big deal, she'd say, but her kids loved the extra desserts. Sarah had shown everyone that you can't judge someone just by how they look. She seemed like a regular mom, but she was a hero who fixed the neighborhood. As for Linda, she had to face big consequences. The police said she broke the law by taking HOA money, so she had to go to court. She also had to pay back all the money she stole, every penny she spent on her car, her trips, and her fancy deck. It was a long list, and it wasn't going to be easy for her. Nobody felt too sorry, though. Linda had been unfair for so long, and now it was her turn to learn a lesson. The neighborhood wasn't the same anymore, and that was a good thing. People were friendlier. They waved to each other and stopped to chat. They didn't worry about silly rules or mean notes. Sarah had made everything better, and everyone was grateful. It was like the sun shone a little brighter and the flowers grew a little taller, all because one person stood up for what was right. Sometimes the person you don't notice is the one who makes the biggest difference. Think about Sarah. Nobody thought she was special at first. She was just a mom who lived in a regular house, made pancakes for her kids, and walked her dog. People saw her at the grocery store or yoga class and thought, oh, she's nice, but nothing exciting. They didn't know she had a secret. They didn't know she was super smart and brave. But Sarah didn't care what they thought. She didn't need to shout or show off. She just did her job, quietly putting clues together until she caught Linda and made the neighborhood better for everyone. That's the cool thing about Sarah. She let her actions talk for her. She didn't argue with Linda or try to prove she was better. She stayed calm even when Linda was mean. She smiled when Linda complained about her flowers or music. But all along, Sarah was working on something big.